I've had some BLM folks tell me that he said, you'll never have to worry about fire, Ed. He says, this country won't burn. Yeah, Monday morning, just about right straight south of us, we seen 3 lightning strikes go down. Pretty soon I seen some smoke boil up, and I called to Boise Dispatch and BLM and turned it in.
All stations, Boise Dispatch, report wildfire in 4 South, 5 West, Section 34.
I was initial attack on it. I was the first aircraft over the fire. Before I even got there, right when I took off, and we were still probably 20 minutes out. And I called dispatch and I ordered, we call ordering the world. I ordered every available aircraft that they could get me. It was going huge. There's a big column coming up off of it.
The potential is high. It's running right now. I'll take a heavier tanker and Type 1 helicopter as well.
I was to take my resources and basically go direct, anchor in, go direct, and put it out on the right flank. We went right next to the fire edge, put dozer line in, supported the dozers with engines and a helicopter and fire retardant. We flanked the fire all the way to Cow Creek Road.
It's going to make a push for Cow Creek Road. Like I said, we need to make sure we hold this road.
Burned Cow Creek Road out for probably a mile and a half. First night, I'm going to say 2 o'clock in the morning, we basically had it contained at about 7,500 acres. Started at 5 in the morning, we had the breakout. By this point in time, we're starting to move resources from other divisions to go help with that breakout because we're getting spread thin now. A lot of line. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, we started getting multiple slopovers over our line, and it was off to the races.
Fire's blown out basically all around. We're in complete defensive mode.
Extreme fire behavior, it was going crazy. We had shifting winds. Every 20, 30 minutes, it would shift 90 degrees to 180 degrees. And, strong winds at that. So we were chasing it all over the place. It got into some heavier fuel terrain and it was just rolling. And there was just no stopping it at that point.
It's really moving. It's jumped the dozer line a couple times and it's running towards the structure. There's probably a couple hundred head of cow in there.
Every 35 years, this area is going to burn, 30 to 50 years. Unfortunately, with cheatgrass, some of our areas are now burning every 3 to 5, 3 to 7 years because the cheatgrass comes back quicker than the perennials. It comes back quicker than the native vegetation and establishes itself, and it gets into this repeat fire cycle that happens over and over. Medusa head and the cheatgrass thrive, the native plants don't, and you get a quicker fire cycle with higher fuel loadings, and it's more difficult to control.
Cheatgrass, it gets very fine and spindly, which creates very good tinder. Cheatgrass will grow rapidly in the early spring and then die. We get a good heavy rain and it'll grow again. And the limit that they put on grazing has allowed us to have 4 and 5 and 6 growths of fodder out there, which just creates a thick carpet mat that once it gets really dry, like in August, later in the season, a rabbit can sneeze and it'll start a fire out here.
Cheatgrass is the bane of my existence. It moves with disturbance. It moves with fire. Seed can last in the ground for, 7 years. It likes to spread. It moves on its own into, a fairly decent plant community just because it's so well adapted here. There weren't many things in this area, at least in, maybe the Great Basin, that had evolved with cheatgrass to evolve barriers for it. That's why it's terrible that it's here, and it's going to be hard to keep it to a minor part of the community.
3 days of some crazy east wind came up in the night there and early that morning and blew some embers out of the fire and started burning to the west. That east wind would kick up and it'd come down these canyons with a vengeance. I just went to work trying to get my cows kicked out of that country and thinking, well, I can outrun this, I can do this. It ain't a whole bunch of scares me, but I was spooked. And rightly needed to be to get out of there. When that fire come down this other fork of Dry Creek, like I said, it was from ridge top to ridge top, and lots of fuel in there, lots of grass, lots of sagebrush, lots of bitter brush, and I have no idea how high the flame was, 30, 40, 50 feet, whatever they were. The fire was just roaring. I'm hard of hearing. And I had the four-wheeler running, and I could hear the fire roaring over all this noise. It was a spooky deal to be in.
The wind's blowing 30, 40 mile an hour. There was times when it was like hell on earth. We had fire whirls that was 10 feet in the base, hundreds of feet tall, traveling at 20, 30 miles an hour.
We're about to take some really wicked winds right now, and there's really nothing we're going to be able to do about that breakout. So do me a favor and make sure everyone over there is in a good, safe spot.
We fall back to Highway 95 to burn out, the road before the fire gets there. And while I was burning out the road with a couple other people, I was seeing 150, 200-foot flame lengths off of sagebrush. I've only seen that probably 3 or 4 times in my career like that, and it was pretty amazing. We split up in teams as best we could because we just didn't have that many resources of that. The fire was so big. And I have another guy with me that's a 28-year veteran. He was actually firing the road, and I was driving right beside him. And the whole intent was just to try to hold what we could hold. And I told him, when I tell you to get in the rig, don't ask, don't take your pack off, just jump in because we're leaving. So we need to make sure that out in front of me I have a place to go. I thought we had a viable plan to get him out of there, get myself out of there. I just need to run up the road about a half a mile. But if the truck would have broke down, we might have been in a little trouble there.
We were too late. Like just hornets falling out of a nest. They just fall through them flames, and they were running hard. They'd have made it. I got them out the first time, they'd have made it, but when the fire crossed the highway, it did them in. There was cows that were petered out. One old bull, when he come out of this fire, he was burned. I could tell he was burned. One foot was burned pretty bad, and he got down, and when that fire jumped the highway and burned down there, he just hunkered up and put his ass to the fire, and I didn't think he was that bad until I come back out to get him or to see what I had to do. And you know how when you get a bad burn and your skin gets all dry and wrinkly? Well, he was that way from here back. He was crispy. That was the hard part, is killing these cows that you'd known their family. You'd had their family for 30 years. You could trace this cow back. You knew her mother and grandmother and great-grandmother and on back. There's no other thing for them. You can't save them. You can't pet them. There's nothing you could do. That if it had been a human, you'd have been in the burn center somewhere with morphine dripping in your arm, facing the rest of your life with skin grafts and misery and pain. And that ain't gonna happen for an old cow. The most humane thing you could do is just get them dead, get them out of their misery. When I first went out with the gun, I thinking I might have to kill 10 or 15, and I ran out of ammo 2 or 3 times. Out of 70 head, I had to put down 55, 56 head.
I've lived in the Reynolds Creek area almost all my life. I had never seen anything like this soda fire at all. And it was something that we was always scared of because we never had water up here like the fire trucks and all that kind of stuff. Never had a fire district to protect us. So to have this really happen, I was really thankful for the firefighters. Over the ridge, over there by Whiskey Hill, it would die down, you know, and it was just a beautiful glow. I know that sounds awful, but there was a lot of beauty in it, believe it or not, even though it was devastating. 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, thought it was going the other direction. I thought it was going south. And so I ran to town real quick to get some water and some sandwich making stuff. We knew that there was going to be somebody up here fighting fire. My daughter called me then and said, it's turning, it's coming on your property, and you better get whatever you want out of the house, and oh my gosh. So I come flying back home, and sure enough, it was right on the edge. Never, ever in my whole life ever experienced anything so scary and so helpless. All I did was just say, I gotta leave it into your hands, God, because I sure can't do anything. And so that's kind of what I did. I just left it up to him, and his will be done. When one of the ranchers and his bulldozer, Charlie Lyons, come down that road through that gate and making that line all the way down the edge of the fence, I felt so overwhelmed and blessed that he was there. That, to me, was the turning point, because the big bomber came in and dropped the retardant right on that line. When that fire hit that line, the guys could take it from there. That's where the fire ended.
There's a ton of potential for it to spread. There's no barriers or anything between here and Wilson Creek.
Well, as an old rancher and been ranching all my life up here, the fuel load is too high. The stubble height is too high. The ranchers should be able to graze off more. This is the livelihood of the rancher, and he is going to protect that. He's going to be the best steward of the ground, so he's not going to overgraze. In my opinion, BLM needs to loosen up the chokehold on the range land a little bit and let the ranchers have a little more say-so. Graze it down and then get off of it a while and go back, maybe every other year or something like that. But not just leave the stubble so high, because that stuff takes hold and you can't eat it down then. You know, it spreads bad that fire's the only thing that's going to clean it up.
Grazing reduces fine fuels, reduces the grasses that are out there, and thereby reduces the fire risk. It has to be in place prior to fire season so that it reduces those fuel loads when is most likely to burn. At the same time, you don't want to impact the riparian areas, and you want to promote the perennial grasses and the native vegetation that's out there.
Livestock grazing, it's just one of the many multiple uses that the BLM has. For that reason, we're not in the business of harvesting the forage for just livestock. We set limits on how much use cattle can graze so that we ensure we leave enough for the wildlife, for clean water, for people to recreate.
I'm worried about fire in the future. A couple, 3 years down the road, if something doesn't change with the seeding and BLM's grazing practices, you bet it's a real threat. To me, it's a real threat. We could see it again.
Dispatch, Kelly Tanker 217 Alpha Charlie on National, just off of Boise en route to the soda fire. 2 souls on board, 2+30 on the fuel.
There's nothing a human being is going to do with a fire engine or a bulldozer or dropping retardant from the sky that was going to stop that fire. It was really hard to contain just because of the extreme fire behavior, the topography, and the wind. The wind just never really let up. You kept getting winds from multiple directions. Under those extreme conditions, if an ember blows across the line, you're going to instantly have very extreme behavior. You're going to have flame lengths that if you don't have an engine there immediately, it's not going to catch it. When it's burning that rapidly, 1.5 miles in 8 minutes, you can't get your resources in the right place at the right time.
Right now, I can't get one of my dozers in the hot shot crew where I need them. It's just too hot.
It's painful to see something that large happen on your watch. I mean, I take a lot of pride in what I do, and to see 280,000 acres go up that quickly, you don't want to see that. The impacts to the ranches and to the plant communities and the ecosystem is frustrating. To see the dead cows that are laying there and the dead animals is very frustrating. There are real impacts if you're not successful, and it's hard to take. And you reevaluate everything you do, and you want to make sure you do it better next time and put people out there safely and effectively, and hopefully you have a better result.
We don't have a lot of stuff available. It's the same situation everywhere on the fire. Any additional stuff we get in, I'll hand it to you.
I think about the soda fire from time to time in the standpoint that it was devastating to the local community. That fire got away when I was doing my best to suppress it, and I always second guess things that I did on the fire. If I would have done things a little bit different, maybe we would have held that at 7,500 acres that first night.
There's no better feeling than to be in the service of your fellow man. When you're out there putting your life on the line to protect somebody else's property or protect them, there's just nothing that can equal that. Service is what this whole life should be about. Serving one another without thought of pay. And that's what our volunteer fire department is. We don't have any paid firefighters. And yet, many of us was out there for 5 and 6 days, day and night. At one shift, we put in 52 hours without sleep. Nobody complained. We didn't get paid for that. We were there to serve our community and to help one another. And we did.
Right now, what we're in the process of doing is figuring out how much time we need to give our treatments to recover to allow for grazing. And so that's the process that the BLM goes through almost every fire that we have. So what we want to make sure is that the plants are at a level of vigor that they can withstand grazing. They're not too small, they're well enough established. They've produced a seed head. They've got enough foliar cover to protect the soil from erosion. Once those grazing resumption objectives are met, they can go ahead and return to the BLM lands for grazing.
We don't have native seed out there ready to germinate in all places. Yeah, it'll be in a few, but not a lot. What we have is cheatgrass seed out there ready to explode. That's why we're out there seeding, is to ensure that we have desirable perennial grasses out there with those lateral and deep roots. That is what outcompetes cheatgrass in the long run. We've used Anatone blue bunch wheatgrass. It's available in large quantities, and it has shown some really good adaptive and drought-tolerant characteristics. We're using another species on the introduced side called Siberian wheatgrass. It's called Vavilov 2. We're seeding that into those heavy cheatgrass sites because we need to have a tool to help them evolve from a cheatgrass site to a perennial grass site. You can never eliminate cheatgrass. It's been part of our ecosystem for a very long time, but we want to keep it to a minor component in the community and start moving this toward what we call resistance and resilience. There's very few areas that we can sit back and let recover. The soda fire is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think the research coming in will really help us make better decisions. With the challenges of sage grouse and fire, it's opened up the box and the opportunities for us to move from stabilization into rehab and restoration. So it's going to be exciting the tools that we'll have at our disposal to be utilized for not just soda, but for the future.
I broadcast seeded it all on. $40,000 worth of seed, $40,000 worth of seed. And 3 months tractor work and labor and some of it's sprouting now. Most of it, you can't see the seed, but you can go and find a little dog hair grass here and there and maybe see the seed, and the seed's got a couple roots on it. I'm hoping we get a good stand back. It's time. Boy, it was this fire was a big landscape changer. You know, you look at this same country, the same hills, the same valleys for 20-some years, and this fire running through there just changed the landscape immediately. You know, the brush, sagebrush, and the bitter brush, and the willows and the trees up and down the creek. You know, some of them are killed, some of them burnt completely up, and some of them survived. It'll take time, but yeah, it'll come back.
A definite positive was how the public responded and how they worked together to get things done. The county commissioners pitching in, the community pitching in, the support for the firefighters that are out there was really overwhelming. And sure, there's points of conflict or contention here and there, but overall, it was a very positive experience from the community and the response. And I think the working together during the fire has helped for after the fire. That rolls into the rehab afterwards, solving some of the economic issues, solving some of the grazing issues, and working together.
Well, unbeknownst to us, through the local food movement and people we associated with at the Boise Farmers Market, they started a GoFundMe, and Debbie and I we didn't know about it till there was damn near $15,000 in it, and they, anyway, it did $30,000. Somebody else heard about it, donated a bunch of lumber to us to rebuild. People calling up, wanting to come out and help us seed, help us build fence, you know, whatever. It was a shock. I mean, we didn't ask for anything. People just did it out of the goodness of their hearts. So it was very appreciated, that's for sure.
Good comes out of everything. I mean, no matter how devastating it is, there's always something going to be good. Probably a week later after the fire, my husband and I took our little rhino and went on up in the hill a little bit, and I mean, you could see the land, how it lays, all the little rolling hills, and how it is. Every single rock you could see. There was, even though it was dry and it was black, it was still beautiful. And now it's starting to green, and so it really is very, very pretty now. It will be back. I'm very confident that it will be back. Our seed now that we have planted is already starting to grow. And BLM has been out in October and stuff, in November, and they've been seeding, and so it's just, you know, it's going to be awesome to see when springtime comes.
Voices of Fire was made possible by the National Science Foundation, the USDA-ARS Northwest Watershed Research Center, Margie and Tom Adolph, and by these generous funders.